And I'm actually going to have you start on page 883. I'm sorry, 833. 833. And I'll come there in a moment. So one of the most extraordinary parts for me of being Jewish is that we read and reread the same text, and every time we read it, we find something different, something new. You know, and I had a professor who challenged us to write our theology every 5 years. And he says, if your theology hasn't changed, you're not growing. And if how you read the text doesn't change from year to year, you're not growing. And the more you read it and find other ways to read it, the more you find pieces of yourself that you need to learn about. So there is a commentator who I've been bringing you the last couple weeks. She writes for an organization called Hadar. Hadar is a wonderful kind of yeshiva place of learning in New York with amazing scholarship. Her name is Tali Adler. And she's young enough to be my child, and her wisdom is extraordinary. And here's how she frames this week's portion. She frames this week's portion as the contrast between Miriam, the person of words, and Moses, the person who had trouble with words. And sometimes when we have trouble with something, we revert back to other behaviors. So he was the person of the staff and the rod. And she explains this story of striking the rock rather than talking to it in terms of that contrast between siblings. So in order to know that Miriam is the person of words, you have to go back through some of the stories connected to her. I think you're going to be surprised. How many times do you think Miriam is mentioned in episodes in the Torah? Give me a guess. How many? 10. 3. Barry Sherman. She's only mentioned 4 times. She's only mentioned 4. Now, we know a lot more about her because Midrash, which are tales about the tales that have deeper meanings, Midrash expounds quite a bit. So the first story where we encounter her is the story of her baby brother Moses surviving. And mom decides to put him in this basket by the river. And Miriam is supposed to go and watch. And she goes and watches over him, and Pharaoh's daughter comes down. This must be one of the Hebrew babies. And as she sees Pharaoh's daughter come, she leaps out of the reeds, and she says, she hasn't even decided, I'm going to take this Hebrew baby. She says, shall I go get a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? This is a woman who knew how to use her words, to imagine what might be, to take advantage of a moment. Do you ever find yourself you're in one of those moments, and it's like one of those, like, this is a moment that's a life-changing moment, and you can't find the right words? Miriam found the words in that moment. So that's story number 1. Story number 1. Story number 2 is the very famous story where after we cross the Sea of Reeds, she lifts her voice up in songs with the women. And they sing a song to God. She finds the words to praise God. And in that text, they say that she was a prophetess, a person who brings the words to the people of God. Story number 3 is the place where I had you put your ribbons, 832. For me, it's a disturbing story. I'm sorry, page 833, chapter 12 of the book of Numbers, a couple portions ago. They were at Hatzerot. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. He married a Cushite woman. They said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? By the way, Moses can't even find the words to respond. He's silent. God sticks up for Moses. He's a humble man. He strikes Miriam with Sara'at, this terrible skin disease. And then Moses finds his voice. God healed her. God says, nope, she deserves punishment, but she'll be banished for 7 days. And what's interesting is, what do we learn about her? The people wait. 7 days. She's a person who's engendered this connection and this loyalty. This story merits diving into, but we're not gonna, because I want to get to the next story. But why does it need to be mentioned? Because she's a woman who uses her words sometimes in ways that hurt. And I think that hurt lasts into the story that we're going to read. I think this is a story of hurt that has not been processed. By the way, some commentators say she really didn't say hurtful things. She told him honest truths. But this feels to me like classic sibling rivalry and jealousy. And the text deals with all of those things. But Talia Adler reads this as the power of words, positive and negative. And that takes us to her death, which is today's portion. Go to page 884. And we're going to try to put all of this together in a deep way. 884, we read, the people were at Kadesh, and it just says it straightforward, simple, with no embellishment. Vatamot sham Miriam. Miriam died there, and she was buried there. Now, many of you, when interpreting this story, have said that might be the reason he struck the rock. He didn't grieve. And the lack of grief here contrasts the way the people grieved Aaron in just the next page. And when you don't grieve, it sits with you and it comes out in different ways. But that's not how Talia Adler reads the story. She reads the story not as one of not grieving. Listen to how she interprets it. The detail that you also need to put this all together on 884 is the very next verse after her death is what? The community was without water. So Miriam is seen as the woman of words and the woman of water. The water seems to dry up once Miriam dies. Now, let's add a little bit of midrash. So let's go back to the by the Nile story. The midrash associates Miriam as one of the midwives who saved the Jewish children. And they said she was the one called Pu'ah, because she knew how to coo and soothe the babies. So this woman of words gets developed in the midrash. I hope that you bring this next midrash to your Passover. And it's the story of Moses and Miriam and Aaron's father saying, I'm not going to have another child because it's dangerous. The children are killed. And Miriam confronts him and says, that's wrong. What if it's a girl? She would live. You are really doing something wrong. And because of her words, he changes his mind. So Midrash develops Miriam as the person of words. We certainly saw it in the story of Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter. And now let's come to the striking of the rock. And I think that you will find it to be Talia Adler's explanation really, really interesting. So go back to verse number 7. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, you and your brother Aaron take the rod, assemble the people. Before their eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Dibartem el hasela. Here's how Talia Adler interprets this command to talk to the rock. She says it's not arbitrary. She says that this is God in a moment of stress for Moses, following this terrible critique from Miriam and following her death, telling Moses to use the tool that she always used, to use the tool of words. Listen to what she writes. It's a deliberate command to use Miriam's tools to coax water from the well. It's a command to honor her memory. What an interesting way to read this talk to the rock. This is a way to honor your sister who you need to grieve. Use her wonderful skills. Then you'll make sure that the people see that even though she's gone, her method of leadership, leading through words, endures. So Tali Adler says this whole thing of talk to the rock is God's way of letting the people see that Miriam lives. And I'm sitting with that saying, wow, our loved ones live as we do, as they did. And what a different read of this story. I found myself so puzzled when I first read it. It's a drush. It's taking details and saying, maybe this is a way to put it all together. God was saying, use Miriam's technique. Use her method of leadership. And that lets her live in some ways. And then she added something else. She said, perhaps this is an invitation to Moses to forgive his sister by using her tools. Yes, her words hurt him, but remember that Miriam also spoke in ways that gave life. Do you guys get what a radical interpretation this is? This is saying that not only did God say use Miriam's tools to keep her alive, but use Miriam's tools as a way to gain some forgiveness over a hurt you're carrying. To realize that her words, yes, they hurt you, but her words have also brought life to us in so many different ways. So might this story of striking the rock that I've always read as, oh, he didn't grieve the way he should, he took credit on themselves by saying we, he calls them morim, you rebels, and the second a leader disconnects with the people, the leader is no longer capable of being a leader. Might this really be about using Miriam's tools and about forgiveness? And then I sit with her drush, which is a drush. It moves from the contextual meaning. And I say to myself, might there be places where I need to forgive that I've been holding on to and not even aware of? Might there be tools that my siblings may have that I've chosen not to pursue? Because, there was a really interesting article in the New York Times Magazine in the middle of May about siblings. You should read it. Francine Klagsberg wrote a book called Mixed Blessings, and her thesis is that often we do things different than our sibling. Like, how many times do we find ourselves saying, that's his thing? I do things very differently. That's her thing, and it reduces competition. And Klagsburn says that until we can recognize that and acknowledge it, there may be pieces of ourselves that we can't pursue. Might this be an invitation to say, are there pieces of my siblings that I haven't pursued because I left that to them? And so Tali Adler's drash takes me places that I need to go. Might I need to find new and different ways of responding than the way I've always used? Because then Tali Adler takes verse number 9. Moses took the rod before the Lord as he commanded him. They assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said, listen, you rebels. But you got to go to the Hebrew. Shimuna hamorim. Listen, you rebels. Note that the word for rebels is the exact same letters as the name Miriam. Mem, Resh, Mem. And I've always interpreted this as he hadn't mourned Miriam, and so the name comes out. Tali Adler says this is something different. This is something different. This is Moses not being able to use Miriam's tools. So what does he do? He reverts back to what he's always done. He uses the rod. He strikes it because he didn't know how to use Miriam's tools. He cries out her name almost right before he rejects words as a method, and he chooses the staff instead. And she has us imagine him saying morim as a combination of grief, of longing, hurt, and anger as he rejects words. He rejects his sister. He raises his staff instead. And then she writes this. This, perhaps, is why Moses is doomed to die before entering the land, not because something has changed about him, not that he's an old guy and can't lead anymore, but because he's not changed the way that is necessary to heal and fill Miriam's void. Have we allowed ourselves the time necessary to heal? I am deeply aware as I completed saying Kaddish for my mother that I needed every day of those 11 months. And I know those of you who've done Kaddish for the entire time are aware of the healing that can only happen through allowing time. And might Moses have not allowed that? Moses has learned the danger of words and how she used them to hurt him, but not the ways in which they can create life. And by failing to learn, he forgets who his sister was. And so this becomes a story of Miriam, the person of words, and Moses couldn't embrace that as another way because he was so wounded. What a different way to read this story. But it has a happy ending. And the happy ending is that Moses becomes a person who embraces words. And the whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses talking and talking and talking to us, reminding us who we are and who we're meant to be. That maybe the biggest honor that he could give his sister was embracing the way that she taught through words. So that's my drosh based on Tali Adler's drosh. Thoughts, comments? I threw a lot at you very quickly. I've got a microphone. I'm coming down. Thoughts? Yes. This is always good. I get many steps in by doing this. Deborah.
I just don't understand why there wasn't more of a mourning for Miriam. Who was in charge of creating a mourning period, as Aaron had?
Yeah. One of the things that happens is when we read the text carefully, we say, why didn't they mourn? Why didn't they mourn? And they needed to, like Aaron had. And I actually think that the lessons that come from that are profound. That by not mourning, they set up the circumstance where failure was going to happen. By not mourning, they didn't honor her. By not mourning, they reflected that so often we're caught up in our hurts that we don't do what we need to do. And I've seen that way too many times of people who are so caught up in their hurt and anger that they don't mourn the way they need to mourn. And so they didn't do it because they are flawed humans. And when we don't learn the lessons connected to our flawed humanity, it ripples in our lives.
Another part of that story I don't understand is that both Miriam and Aaron complained about Moses.
Yeah.
And Miriam gets the tzarat,
Yeah.
not Aaron. And
Yeah.
Moses prays for her healing, but she doesn't appear again for a few chapters, and then she's just to die.
Yeah.
And then Aaron, of course, dies afterwards.
By the way, the unresolved family tensions, and then you don't have a chance to fix them, and then the person dies, that happens, at least I've witnessed it, more than you can imagine. The mystery of why isn't Aaron punished and Miriam is when they spoke against him. You know, the rabbis have done tons of stuff as they try to reconcile those two. Maybe she was the band leader in terms of the person of words, but maybe the worst punishment is watching someone you love suffer. And Aaron may have been punished tenfold.
Well, he also got off without punishment, really, with the golden calf. It's a very strange bit of luck he's had.
Aaron is the guy who seems to get off. Aaron also had such intense tragedy in his life in terms of losing his 2 sons that may override everything. Leslie. No. Then we'll go. Everybody will hear.
So even though we're not supposed to pick favorites, this is my favorite portion because it's so enigmatic, and who doesn't like a good enigma? So
It opens doors.
I think for me, I've shared this interpretation. I love yours that you shared, and of course it's true. It starts with the red heifer, which is something that's difficult to understand. And sometimes we just have to open our hearts and let go and have faith. And when God gave Moses a different direction, Moses needed to open his heart, let go, and have faith. And so there had been, this is now 40 years later, that although Moses and God had this amazing intimacy, maybe over all these years, day in and day out, manna day in, day out, their relationship had become a little transactional, which sometimes happens in relationships that were once very intimate. And God was giving Moses an opportunity to just say, if you love me, just do it this way. And Moses couldn't.
Wow. Leslie, you always interpret so thoughtfully, really in the vein of Moses not seeing the opportunity. This was God saying, there's another way to do this. And we've gotten a little stale in our relationship. We're doing it way too transactionally. Let's redevelop our intimacy. And Moses couldn't hear it. By the way, that's an interesting message for me as a take-home. Have I gotten so stuck in how I do things that I can't see when someone offers me another way? And there might be another way. And I sit with that. In other words, for me, all of this, all of the interpretations, they're beautiful. And Enigma leads to that. But the power of interpretations, it has also caused us to say, how do I live that? And for me, leaving that door open to another way to see it, that's a powerful drush.
Well, first of all, I really, really like this passage. Every time you said Miriam, it felt like you were talking to my soul, because my name is Miriam. So a couple things, I'll try to be brief. One is that I'm wondering if the sibling rivalry could be expanded to include paradigms between husbands and wife, for example, or between nation states. So that's one thing.
For sure. In other words, once you understand dynamics of relationship, when there is a closeness, you actually can extend it to all kinds of areas.
Okay. And then another thing is there's a passage about the caduceus with the serpent staff.
Yeah.
So God creates a model of healing that I'm wondering, I was surprised that that wasn't addressed by either Adler, was her name Tali Adler?
Well, the thing about a drush is you can only look at one section within a certain amount of time. The whole deal with the snake, I can't wait till she writes about it, because it's such an odd story because it comes so close to idolatry. Look at this thing, but the snake story is a story of healing, and that healing happens as we're looking up to God on a certain level. Once we weave all of those stories together, that may be what allows Moses to become like his sister, the person of words, because he reconnects to God. I don't know that I'm searching for happy endings, for all that I like happy endings. I think that there's more growth and movement in the story as we move forward.
More simply, without capital letters in Hebrew, how do you know the difference between mem, resh, mem as Miriam or as rebel?
You don't. And the power of this story is you're going to read it in contextual ways Because why would he scream to them, you Miriam? In other words, contextually, vocalizing it as Miriam doesn't make sense, but reading it acontextually, without the vowels, and say he screamed out something that did not make sense because of his pain over his sister, both unresolved pieces and unrealized grief. It actually makes it powerfully meaningful. So we get to hold on to both readings knowing that it's just written mem resh yud mem.
You know, I agree with what you've been talking about, but the real question was, so he did something of lack of faith for that particular time. Should he have been punished as much for what was his transgression for the first time, so to speak? And we would have to say maybe so, only to the extent that if he would actually be let to go into Israel, it would impact the ability for Joshua to act as an individual without having somebody in the background saying, I'm the senior guy.
Sure.
I really need to do that. And I think God understood all that.
So maybe this is a story where God has an outcome in mind.
Right.
And you need to find something to allow you to get to the outcome, even if it might not make full sense. Good. All right. Yesher koach. Discussing all of this is always so powerful. I am going to go next door and see what they have to say. And it's very interesting. This room and next door interpret things very differently. So that's the beauty of getting to teach. We will continue with Musaf. Barry. What page are we?
184, I hope.
Yes, we are.
Okay, page 184 for Chatzi Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabba.
Amen.
Bi'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chad.